Hey everybody, and welcome once again to Poddywood, the show where we talk about movies with the people who make movies. I am one of your co-hosts, Steve Hester, and with me as always is...
Well, I'm about to start regretting this show and starting the way we have because I've only just realised looking at my lovely desk area that I do not have a drink present. This is going to be a ride and a half.
Yes.
But yes, my name is Andrew Roger Carson, by the way. I am the person who co-hosts this show with the lovely and delicious Steve Hester.
Yes, who actually has a drink in front of him. Oh yes, tasty beer. So lovely and refreshing. Well, it's been an interesting week for new releases. We've seen the trailers land for the new Avatar movie, for Thor Love and Thunder. Yeah, so it looks like the blockbusters, or at least sequel blockbusters, are going to be here in full force over the next 12 months.
Yes, but can you actually believe Top Gun Maverick is going to be upon us? It's almost like you've waited 10 years on top of 30 years since you first saw the trailer for this movie.
Yeah, I definitely saw the trailer for that movie. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I went to see. I went to see Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and it was a great movie. But surprisingly, at the beginning during the trailers, they showed a 5-minute scene from Top Gun Maverick, and it had the added bonus of being in a Dolby cinema. So I was in my nice recliner. I had my drink. I was there, and my seat was rumbling like you could not believe. It was a thing of beauty. And speaking of things of beauty, Steve.
Oh, well done. Yeah. Well, round of applause there. Yes, great segue. Speaking of beauty, it is time to look at what's in the box from last week, which was Sam Mendes' 1999, not 2007, for once. 1999 movie American Beauty, starring, amongst others, Kevin Spacey and Annette Bening.
Yes.
Yes, it's the story of a guy called Lester who is basically middle-aged in a loveless marriage with a daughter who doesn't seem to like or respect him. He's just caught up, as many people do, really, in looking back at his life and then suddenly coming to the realization that everything that was fun and that's good that he used to enjoy has just been thrown out the window. And everything all comes into very, very sharp focus when he starts fantasizing about his daughter's friend called Angela, played by Mena Suvari. And this is one of those movies where, even if you haven't actually seen it, you will have seen the pastiches of it. You will see the parodies of it. And without a word of a lie, myself and my girlfriend have been rewatching Family Guy. And I know I bring this up a lot, and because they parodied just everything to hell. But last night I got into bed and my girlfriend was watching Family Guy. An episode came on where they were parodying the cheerleader scene.
Right. Okay.
But instead of her opening her blouse to the being loads of rose petals coming out, it was chicken legs. And
okay.
One kind of flew around Peter Griffin's head and into his mouth. So, yeah, you've got this man who's trying to get his life back on track, and you've also got his daughter, played by Thora Birch, who doesn't appear to be acting anymore, although I did hear that was partially down to her dad being just monstrously overbearing. And it's all about her relationship as well with her new next-door neighbour, who's a drug dealer, and who's obsessed with being a video diarist, and whose father is an ex-military man. And the whole thing is about recognizing what you need out of life to actually make you happy versus what the world says that you should have. Because the world says you should have this house, you should have this job, you should have this family, you should have this couch, you should have this in your front room, you should have these in your front garden, when in reality all you really need is just yourself and your own inner peace to guide you through. At least that's what I was taking away from it. And you've got a wonderful supporting cast in there. You've got a nice little cameo from one of my favourite people, Scott Bakula.
Yep.
Of Quantum Leap and Enterprise and NCIS New Orleans. At least I think it's New Orleans. New Orleans. And the whole thing comes to this crescendo towards the end where he is... Spoilers! Although it's not really a spoiler because it's mentioned within the first 5 minutes. When he dies, he is killed by the next door neighbour, who is effectively a closeted homosexual and has kind of misconstrued what's been going on between Lester and his son Ricky, who Lester's been buying pot from him, but he thinks that the two of them are having an affair. And that, I think, for me personally, was the weakest point in the film. Because it felt like it was almost film schooly. Like
really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like there's lots of it which is brilliant. Taking everything which has happened with Kevin Spacey out of the equation. I don't want to address everything that's happened.
No.
But I will say this, Kevin Spacey is a really good actor.
Yes, he is.
And it comes across in spades, and the dynamic that he's got with Annette Bening is brilliant in its horribleness with this hideous marriage that's going on. And he carries the film superbly. And there's wonderful moments of character development as he starts to grow and emerge from this cocoon of middle-aged suburbanite boredom that he's been in for ages. But this sort of Damocles that's hanging over the whole thing, where you know he's going to die, it just kind of feels like it is like out of like a film school thing. Like famously, the original ending to the movie Clerks had Dante being shot.
Yes.
And then one of the producers said, no, take it out. That kind of felt like it needed to happen here. The fact that he was murdered didn't feel like it belonged there. Really, I was expecting it to be more like, oh, he has a heart attack. They're not going to go down the murder route. The murder route's going to be cheap. He's going to be like a fake out, and you're going to think he's going to get murdered. But no, it was that, and it didn't kind of fit right with me.
But did you know that actually in the original script, actually Kevin Spacey was supposed to go through with the sex scene with Mina Savari's character.
Mm.
And they decided kind of 11th hour, it's like, yeah, no. I wonder if the feedback from Kirsten Dunst when the role was offered to her maybe kind of got back to all of the males on that movie, where she was just like, kiss Kevin Spacey?
It's,
you know?
It's an uncomfortable scene. And you do kind of almost feel a little bit shortchanged by it, insofar as this is what he's been after throughout the whole movie. But at the same time, you're also extremely glad that nothing happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think I look at it at the way that it was shot, and it kind of really adds to that layer of the story, the character arc. You know, this is a person obsessed by something he feels he wants, and it's that moment where he suddenly just realizes who he is, how old he is, you know, where he is at his point in life. And, you know, it's tragically just a couple of seconds before his life comes to an end over, you know, Chris Cooper's character. And Chris Cooper is one of my favorite actors of all time. And he is absolutely amazing in this movie. You know, and this is another character who is denying what he really wants or who he really is.
Yeah.
You know, and it's that kind of mirror image to the Kevin Spacey character. And I really kind of like that. You know, and when you look at this, I mean, this was Sam Mendes' first movie. You know, so this was a job given to him by Steven Spielberg. Spielberg had read the script and said, I don't want to change a word of this script. And he personally recommended Sam Mendes for the job. And Sam Mendes, he's now one of the, you know, he's one of the best filmmakers out there. 1917, Road to Perdition, Skyfall. He's even done a Bond movie, for God's sake. You know, and I'll also throw Revolutionary Road in there because that is definitely worth seeing.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of Skyfall, but that's a different story for another time. It's actually quite good of you to pick up on the fact of denial, and I think now that you've mentioned it, that's a really, really good anchor point for a lot of the characters.
Yes.
because they're either denying something that they were, or they're trying to deny other people from having something.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at the tagline for the movie, and it's even written on Kevin Spacey's in his office. Look closer, and that's what this movie is really all about. It's like peeling away the falseness of it, the paint job in everyone's life, and it was so well cast, this movie. And a lot of people were doing it for less than their usual rate, so it was almost kind of an independent movie passion project for a lot of people. And who really came out of it strong is Thora Birch. I mean, she was actually 17 years old at the time, doing her first topless scene at 17 years old. Child labor representatives were on set constantly, and her parents were okay with it because it fit in with the story. And the thing that I really like, you kind of look at the humor of this movie, because you can tell that so many of the moments were unscripted, and they were, and it makes it so much better. You can tell these people were actually having fun. There's the scene with Kevin Spacey and Wes Bentley getting stoned outside of, his wife's business party.
Yeah, where they're talking about Reanimator.
Yeah. And they genuinely got the giggles. You can tell by Wes Bentley's face that it is, completely, we're just going with it. We've completely lost it. And you've got a fantastic little turn from Peter Gallagher in there. As the real estate king.
Yeah, they obviously couldn't afford any decent grey hair paint, so they just went down to the local joke shop and got some of that grey hair spray that you usually put in your head if you're going to a fancy dress party. Wes Bentley actually was a really good turn in this.
Yeah, he is, and he was kind of a newcomer as well, so I think this may have been his actual first feature. I can't remember seeing him in anything before it. But just in getting back to Peter Gallagher, I actually met Peter Gallagher in LA on the set of Grace and Frankie.
Right.
So I was there meeting Martin Sheen and the other people involved in it. Sam Waterston was there. And it was a great day. And we're all outside. I'm talking there with Martin and Ramon. And out of nowhere, Peter Gallagher just walks up and he's like, "Hey, Martin," and this and that. And we're just like, wow. And a couple of seconds beforehand, Ramon got my picture with Martin.
I've seen it, yeah.
There's a security guard out there. And when Peter Gallagher walks up, the security guard just says, "Hey, listen, could I ask a big favor and get a picture with you guys?" And Martin and Peter and everyone, "Oh, yeah, sure. And he says, "Oh, would you mind taking it?" And he hands me his camera. And I'm like, shit, this is a picture I would have wanted.
Yeah.
But Peter Gallagher is one of the nicest guys, and just the small exchanges that I had with him, really nice guy. And as he walked away, Martin just said, "Is that the most handsome guy you've ever seen in your life?" And it's true. He is just this really handsome guy, and it just radiates off him. But Peter Gallagher, every time I see him in something now, it's like, wow, that guy is just a really cool guy. And he's got a great turn, and just the comic timing with him and Annette Bening in this is just spot on perfect.
Yeah, there's a lot of dark humor in the movie, and to be fair, at times it actually kind of reminded me a little bit of The Big Lebowski. I don't know if it was the time period that it was shot in, so there kind of may have been echoing a little bit of the styles, but there was that kind of that undercurrent of this darkness, and everyone kind of riding it with a smile on their face, which was lovely to watch.
Yeah, I mean, the top line of people from Kevin Spacey, who carries this movie on his back, and it's so weird because originally, before Kevin Spacey took that role, Chevy Chase was approached for that role, who turned it down because he only wanted to do family movies at that point, and Tom Hanks was also approached on it as well. And it wouldn't have worked. It would not have worked with those two people. And it's hard to say with Tom Hanks that, nothing would work with Tom Hanks.
I think it's because he's a bit too clean cut.
Yeah. And maybe that's what they're going for. Maybe they thought, Kevin Spacey's a real clean cut actor. Maybe not in his personal life, but, he's a clean cut actor. Other than that, the soundtrack to this is brilliant. You've got some great Bill Withers music in there, which is always a plus for me. Mm-hmm. You have Conrad Hall cinematography, which is beautiful to look at. It really does capture it. And this also has some factoids.
Go on, hit us with the factoids.
Well, this was actually the first movie from DreamWorks to win Best Picture at the Oscars. And a lot of people think, didn't Saving Private Ryan? Well, Saving Private Ryan was actually a co-production with Paramount.
Okay.
This almost became the fourth movie in Oscar history to win the Big Five.
So that's direction, script, best picture,
Best Actor and Best Actress.
all right.
And Annette Bening's loss prevented it from joining that, which is a shame because she was phenomenal in this. I don't think I've seen her any better than what she was in this role. Maybe in The Grifters. I liked her in that. Now, take this in mind. This was the first ever film to win Best Picture at the Oscars, the Producers Guild, the BAFTAs, the Critics' Choice, and the Golden Globes.
Wow.
Exactly. So, American Beauty, I still think it's a classic. I love it, especially as I'm now reaching middle age.
Yeah, I think now that both of us are in our early 40s, it does kind of take on a bit of a new meaning.
Yes. It makes you more conscious of how long you're in the shower now.
Oh, so, you had to bring that scene up, didn't you? Oh, dear.
Yes. I love the way that, I think it was at the Oscars in 2000 when Billy Crystal was hosting, and he did his usual video skit at the beginning. And they did a play on Psycho where Billy Crystal's in the shower and the curtain pulls back and it's Kevin Spacey. What are you doing in my shower? Would you like to use my shampoo?
That's actually quite a good impression.
Oh, well, you know, I try my best. So, I take it you enjoyed American Beauty.
I did. Like I say, I'm not too thrilled with the final few moments. I thought that the death was... It just seemed a bit... we need to do something shocking and dramatic for the conclusion. But as far as the rest of the movie goes, I thought it was really well acted. The soundtrack, Thomas Newman's score was wonderful, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great film.
So yes, that is American Beauty. That is what's in the box review for this week, and we segue nicely into our anniversary section.
We watch them again all of the time, or we get them on Prime for free. But we only know how old they are when we learn their anniversary.
You know, you could cut 30 seconds out of that song and our show would not be that long.
That's where most of the runtime goes, it's that song. You guys aren't even listening to the original version which Neil did, which is a good, another 30 seconds as well.
Something like that, yeah. I know. It was good. It was just too long. That's my fault. I wrote the damn thing. All right. Anniversaries for this week. We have four, the magic 4. And can you believe, Steve?
Yes.
40 years ago. Oof, brace yourself.
Oh dear.
This is where we always feel extremely old.
What?
40 years ago this week, Conan the Barbarian was released.
You know, I've not seen any of the Conan films.
Oh, well, that's that one then. Let's move on to the next. No, okay. Conan the Barbarian, directed by the madman himself, John Milius. I say madman, I think he's just incredibly eccentric and has a real knowledge of handguns. You may know the name John Milius from, if you're a bit older, maybe you know him as the writer of Jeremiah Johnson. You may also know him as the writer of Apocalypse Now or Red Dawn, the original version of Red Dawn. But John Milius was also a director as well. Prior to Conan, he did the surfing movie Big Wednesday with Gary Busey and Jan Michael Vincent.
Mm-hmm.
But Conan the Barbarian gave us one of the biggest things to ever hit motion pictures.
Is this Arnold's weapon?
Yes, it is the Schwarzenegger. And he was the first and only choice for Conan. And it's not hard to understand why, because prior to this, I think he'd only really done maybe Hercules in New York. And
Pumping Iron.
Oh, Pumping Iron. Pumping Iron was the main thing that got him cast. But he'd appeared in movies like Stay Hungry and The Long Goodbye. He was in The Long Goodbye as a bodyguard. So he had these really small kind of roles here.
If I'm right, this was shot it's either just before or just after Terminator.
Just before.
Just before, yeah.
So this was 1982. Terminator was 1984.
Yeah.
So Terminator was his kind of natural follow-on, I guess. But yeah, this was the movie where Arnie suddenly became the businessman, and he got 5% of the profits of this movie. And it was a hit.
Because, I mean, Arnie, when he came to the US, he was already a millionaire. Because
Yeah.
that's what everyone kind of thinks. They look at Arnold, they think, oh, he's a big, dumb action guy and always was. No, he was already a shrewd businessman before he landed in the States. So if he could find the angle to try and make a little bit of money here and there, he was going to do it. So, yeah, it makes no surprise to me whatsoever that he got a nice little tidy back end off this one.
It's true. And the movie is a classic. You know, you've got the voice of Darth Vader himself, James Earl Jones, playing the bad guy. But the things that I always know about this, that some are a bit weird. I would never have actually placed Oliver Stone as the writer of this movie.
No.
Which, it's very weird looking back at it, because I don't think I've ever seen Oliver Stone really do anything that's kind of been fantasy-based.
Apart from JFK.
Oh! Sorcerer Milk, Table 9.
Yeah.
Yes. But not only did he write the script, but he actually asked Ridley Scott to direct it originally.
Okay, I could see that working.
For that early Ridley style, where before he just started doing, movies that kind of look like everyone else's. But back in the day, Ridley's movies looked like, like no one else's movies. You look at The Duelist and Blade Runner and
Alien, obviously.
And Alien, of course. He was a master of style. So I could see where he's going with it. But Ridley declined, obviously, because he was probably doing Blade Runner around the same time as well. And I think we would much rather have Blade Runner than Ridley Scott Conan movie.
Yes.
Now,
on a very brief side note, before you carry on, my girlfriend has been studying to become a nurse, and she was at the colonoscopy department today, just observing. And she actually said that watching the inside of a colon was like looking at the curved tunnels in the Alien films. So take that as you will. I'm not saying that everything that H.R. Giger designed had to do exclusively with sex, but just take that as you will.
Yes, I will no longer be going to his Christmas parties.
No, as you were.
Just in case. Yes. Everyone knows the score from Conan the Barbarian, because the score is possibly the most used temp track in post-production history. So the amount of movies that still use the Conan the Barbarian score as a temporary track is it's still imprinted today. And that score has also been featured in more commercials than any other movie score.
I think I know the one, because like I say, I've not seen it.
It's weird because it reminds me, like the opening strings of it remind me of Total Recalls. And this also set a record, but not at the box office. There was a scene in this movie when James Earl Jones points to a woman, I think one of the concubines that's going to be sacrificed, and she jumps to her death in the scene, and that jump actually set a woman's free fall record of 182 feet by stuntwoman Corrie Jansen.
Nice. Well, props to her.
Yeah, so there you go. And it was also probably not the safest movie to work on either. And I think you can ask Arnie about that when you talk to him, if you see him out on the street. For one, he had a live vulture actually pecking at his body during his crucifixion scene. And the dogs that were chasing him were not actually safe dogs. They were actually vicious dogs that had even bitten their owner. So when he's being chased by these dogs, the look of fear on Conan's face is a genuine look of fear. Arnie was criticised for his performance in this movie. And to be honest, this was his first actual speaking role where they used his real voice outside of a documentary, I guess. In Hercules in New York, he was very badly dubbed in a way that Cockney dubbing experts of Chinese movies would be proud.
Yes, and if you don't know what we're talking about, then just pay attention to the rest of our interview with Cyrus and Ethan coming up later.
Yes, exactly. See, good segue.
Yes.
Standout for this movie, Sandahl Bergman. She was the business in this movie. Absolutely stunning Amazon. She is absolutely brilliant. I don't think she's ever been as good as she has been in this movie. Don't believe me? Check out Conan the Barbarian. That is 40 years old this week.
Wonderful. Right. That's a good one to start off with. So what have we got next?
Well, I'd like to say we continue on an even path, but no, this roller coaster is going down
Okay.
vertically. 35 years ago this week, Steve, a movie by the name of Ishtar was released.
Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4. 3, 2, 3, 4. They are the messengers from God.
You've not seen this, have you?
No, I've just seen the trailer.
I think maybe most people have only seen the trailer. Wow. Where to start with Ishtar? Okay, this has a major story that I'd love to see a documentary made on this, to be honest. It was directed by the comedy actress Elaine May, who, she was an actress, you maybe have seen her in the movie with Walter Matthau, A New Leaf, which is brilliant, absolutely amazing. She steals that entire movie from Walter Matthau. She was also in a Woody Allen movie, Small Time Crooks, that I remember. And she was also a writer of the brilliant John Travolta presidential movie Primary Colors, which you should check out if you've not seen it. And this was her first foray into directing, and a lot of the promotion was on that because she was joining the very elite kind of directing world that was mainly occupied by men, especially in the Hollywood cycles. I think maybe you only had Amy Heckerling, and Catherine Bigelow was just about starting out with Near Dark around that time. So there wasn't a lot of big women director names, and there was a lot being made about it. But unfortunately, it's now known as one of those movies that is one of the biggest losses of all time. But in truth, it's not actually when you compare it to movies that have come out since. Let's put this in perspective. Martin Scorsese has gone on record to say that this is actually one of his favourite movies.
Okay.
Right? Quentin Tarantino and Edgar Wright have also professed their love for this movie as well.
So, okay, you've seen it, have you?
Yes, I have.
Yes. Is it as bad as everyone says it is?
I'm actually going to say no. I think the kind of stories around it have kind of cast this shadow over the movie. I've been entertained watching it. I didn't turn it off, and trust me, I turn a lot of movies off when I'm bored nowadays. But this movie is responsible for coining the term movie jail. Now,
yes.
If you know what movie jail is, it's basically if a director makes a movie that is that bad that they never get considered or given the opportunity to direct a movie again. And unfortunately,
Ghostbusters 2016.
You wait, mate. You wait. That's going to come out of the box one day.
Mm.
But this was in relation to Elaine May. May has never directed another movie following this, but she did get, it was either an Oscar nomination or an Oscar win for writing the script for Primary Colors, which kind of reestablished her back into the mainstream. But she had quite a few bad years. Also, in more recent years, the stars Warren Beatty, Dustin Hoffman, and the late Charles Grodin, they actually did defend the film, and they have stated that the film's failure was mainly down to the production and budgetary problems that were leaked to the press. And that was by the studio head of Columbia at the time, David Putnam, who was on bad terms with Warren Beatty and with Dustin Hoffman at the same time. They basically think that he was basically burying that movie.
Torpedoing it just as revenge.
Yeah, but to be honest, I mean, Warren Beatty didn't help himself. Him and Elaine May, they were arguing a lot off camera and especially in the editing room. Apparently, things got incredibly heated at one point to where Elaine May apparently abandoned the set for a few hours, and Warren Beatty ended up reporting it to Columbia, who said, "We'll fire her for you, but we want you to take over as a director." And I think Warren Beatty didn't want to take over as director because he saw this really as a favour to Elaine May for him to actually do the movie. He wanted off the movie more than anything. So Beatty basically didn't want to direct. He tells the people at Columbia, okay, well, if you fire Elaine May, then me and Dustin Hoffman are going to walk. Basically, what did they ended up doing? They shot everything twice. So they shot Elaine May's way and Warren Beatty's way, which ended up doubling the budget.
Yeah, I can see that doing a lot of damage to a film's budget.
But Elaine May didn't exactly help herself, I don't think. I mean, she shot 108 hours of raw footage for what would become a 107-minute movie. Okay, at a budget of $55 million in the end, and it only made $14 million at the box office. Now, It did end up debuting at number one. So it did come out at number one for a week. But unfortunately, it was released the week before Beverly Hills Cop 2, the most anticipated sequel of that year.
Curse you, John Ashton!
Yes. John, we know it's your fault. It wasn't even the worst film of that year. Ryan O'Neill's movie Tough Guys Don't Dance was the worst movie of 1987. You don't believe me? Watch it. Okay? A lot of people can pin the blame on Elaine May or her inexperience or whatever. But I'm sorry, Warren Beatty wasn't exactly firing on all cylinders in this movie either. He hadn't made a movie in a number of years. Dustin Hoffman hadn't made a couple of movies in a couple of years. I think since Tootsie. I think Tootsie was the last thing he did. So this was kind of a comeback for both of them after this kind of absence. Hoffman was doing Death of a Salesman, I think, on Broadway or whatever. But it does have one positive. The failure of this film made Coca-Cola completely rethink entering the movie business and selling off their selling off their Columbia shares.
Are you sure they actually sold them off? Because they are all over Sony movies at the moment.
Oh, I think they maybe got a little bit of thing there.
Bit?
Yeah.
Jesus.
It's the Coke machines in Double Team. That's what it is.
Yeah.
See, if it was Pepsi, it'd be another thing. No, Ishtar, I'm going to say it's not a great movie, but I don't think it's as bad as, some films that have come out that have completely tanked, say, like John Carter, which, was 300 million and probably made about 17 million, something like that. There's been a lot of bigger duds, including The Matrix Resurrections. There's a lot of bad movies. This is not acted bad. It's not really shot bad. It's just a film. Right? It's just a movie. It's just a movie in the shuffle of other movies. Nothing really stands out about it.
All right. So we've started high and now we seem to be sliding down a bit. So what have we got for number 3?
Well, this one is the kind of Libra scale of movies for me.
Okay.
Because it's a movie I know is bad, but at the same time, I've got a bit of a fascination with it to the point where it's like, I actually enjoy watching this movie. In the same way that Battle Los Angeles was. Can you believe, Steve, 10 years ago this week, the movie Battleship was released?
Okay.
Now, you've seen this movie, right?
I haven't, no.
Oh, for God's sake. Sometimes you really do need to watch some movies.
Well, I had better things to do in my time, like going to the toilet.
This was a game, a video game.
No, it wasn't even a video game. It was a board game.
There was a video game of it. All right, I thought at least you would have tagged onto that.
No, there was a video game of it after the film came out.
Are you saying there wasn't an older version on a Commodore 64 of Battleship?
There might have been, just in the same way as that there was a version of Monopoly. It doesn't make it based on a video game. It's based on it's Battleship, for God's sake.
It's one of those movies that is just Universal obviously sunk a lot of money into this Battleship. Sunk being the word, because I don't think it made a lot of money back. But this was directed by Peter Berg, an actor turned director and producer. For his acting, you may know him as a regular on Chicago Hope. You may have seen him in the movie Very Bad Things with Cameron Diaz and Christian Slater. You may have seen him in a small bit part in Collateral as well. And following this, he has directed other movies. He directed Lone Survivor, which is a great movie with Mark Wahlberg, which you probably haven't seen either, Steve.
No, although briefly I was thinking of Designated Survivor, but that's the TV series. Anyway,
that's the TV series.
Yeah.
But I know Peter Berg actually ends up directing quite a lot of these military or naval type movies, because he did a movie called The Kingdom that starred Jamie Foxx and Jennifer Garner in 2007 as well. But Battleship, based on the Milton Bradley game, Battleship, which I think only one of my friends ever had, a co-production of Hasbro, as Hasbro were getting into the movies with mixed and varying results. I think G.I. Joe line was a Hasbro, is that right?
That was Hasbro. Transformers was Hasbro.
Oh, so they get it right in some respects.
Yeah.
I just can't understand why Battleship.
Well, I mean, sometimes you can turn a game into a film, like we mentioned the other week when we did Get It Freshed. Clue. You know,
Oh,
that's
Clue.
that's that's
Yeah.
brilliant. You know, you've got all the basic elements of it, and it becomes a film which works.
Yeah, but
Battleship.
Clue is a game with a narrative, so of course that's going to work. It's based off a narrative. You know, in that same respect, you could make a Saw movie out of Kerplunk.
I had a mouthful of drink then.
Sorry, you know, but it's Battleship. It's just two people saying numbers to each other.
All I can think of right now is, "Hello, detective. I want to play a game. B5." Yes.
It'd be that scene in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey with Death playing
Yeah.
Battleship with them. The great thing about it has that Steve Jablonsky score. And Steve Jablonsky is like the who's the guy who did the Metal Gear Solid music?
Oh,
Harry
Harry
Gregson
Williams. Yeah.
Yes, and I love that kind of... They're really good action scores, and this works. This movie, unfortunately, was the start of Taylor Kitsch's 3-movie run of despair, as I call it. It's like having, in the course of just 2 years, 3 movies tank so badly that your career now as a leading person is completely gone.
So you've got this and you got John Carter. What was the third one?
Third one was, funnily enough, our old friend Oliver Stone, his movie called Savages.
Right.
So all 3 of them within a year, actually,
Wow.
2011, 2012. All of them underperformed. He was the lead in all 3 of them. So I think the John Carter one was the one that did the most damage. And Battleship came out just after it, I believe. So I think it went John Carter, Battleship, and then Savages. This movie has some really bizarre acting choices to the point where I'm thinking that maybe they were just miscast. Or I think maybe just these people thought no one gives a shit about the acting in this. I mean, you've got some great talent in it.
It's not the kind of movie that you would put some really, really high level actors into. You might have one, like I think Liam Neeson's in this, is he?
Yeah, and he's terrible in it.
Yeah, he just knew to turn up on set, get a paycheck, and go home.
He was doing the Bruce Willis, but in a bigger budget movie.
That was
You
it.
know. Yes.
I'm a ship captain. Hello. We're going
Yes.
to investigate the aliens. Yes.
D7. That's it. He's just there reading out the numbers. D7. FU. That's to my agent.
Yes.
Rihanna, I mean, this was Rihanna's big debut. And, you know, she gives it the try, but she wasn't there yet. And I don't know what kind of director Peter Berg is. You know, he has some amazing movies and he has some misfires, as everyone does. I don't think Rihanna really shone in this, and I think she got a lot of she's the worst actress in it. She was just starting out. Let's give her fair due. Like Arnie was in Conan. She was the big draw. You know, when you get those big blockbuster movies and suddenly they're bringing someone from another medium, like a singer or someone like that, into an actual movie role. And it's that kind of draw, like, ooh, this will bring in the youth demographic who...
Hey, all those teenage kids, they like Rihanna.
Yes.
Let's get her in our movie. That's
Yes.
it. That's it, my dear. You're going to be a star.
Yes. All those kids singing Rude Boy, Can You Get It Up? They'll love Battleship.
Yes.
Yes. But yeah, as I mentioned, Liam Neeson is not great in it, but I think the worst, and I feel so sorry for this actress, there's an actress by the name of Brooklyn Decker who got the role of basically Taylor Kitsch's girlfriend, and you know, she's mucking in there and doing her bit, but it's like the Michael Bay eye candy model type person that they bring in. But yeah, I don't know where the blame falls for it, but at the end of the day, it's a movie about battleships fighting aliens, and you get what you pay for.
Pretty much.
But I actually kind of enjoy it. I really do enjoy it because it is so ridiculous. And there's the enjoyment factor of it. So yes, I do own a copy of Battleship. And I would actually recommend it. Look, if you just want a couple of hours to pass, rainy afternoon, the kids are bored and they just want something that's really loud and full of CGI, chuck it on. Battleship, 10 years old this week.
All right. Well, in that case, that leads us very nicely on to our last entry.
Oh, yes. I saved this one especially for you.
Is the number 4 a number 2?
Well, I don't know how shit it is, Oh, you mean, is it an episode 2?
Uh-oh.
Is it an Attack of the Clones?
Ah!
Yes. Can you believe it's 20 years ago?
Bloody hell.
Now we feel old. I was
Yes.
just playing Star Wars Battlefront on the very levels yesterday and thinking, this feels so fresh until I came onto this show today.
Yes. Now, but you'd be very surprised if I said that I hadn't seen this one. I have. I went to
I'd be mortified.
I went to a midnight showing of this in Manchester, and it was better than the Phantom Menace. Lots of people think that it's worse. I think it can't be worse than the Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
it in a nutshell.
right. This is not one of the best Star Wars movies, right? And
No.
I'm sorry. I went on a date to see this, and
There wasn't a second date, was there?
there wasn't. No, there wasn't. And the thing is, it wasn't even my choice. She wanted to go and see it. Kate Mooney, hi Kate. Directed by George Lucas, and I think that's where we start to go wrong here, really.
Yeah.
Director of Star Wars: A New Hope, all-time classic.
Mhm.
Also director of THX 1138, another classic. American Graffiti, another classic. Writer of Raiders of the Lost Ark, one of the greatest adventure stories of all time. Attack of the Clones is a hard slog to get through.
Yeah, especially when you've got some of the most cringingly embarrassing romance, and I can't put that in as large enough inverted commas as possible.
I call it romance.
Yeah. You're in my very soul from the moment I laid eyes on you. I hate sand. It's cold and coarse and gets everywhere. It's, oh God. Nobody talks like this, George. Nobody. And that whole C-3PO droid factory sequence where he
the reshoots. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right. The droid factory bit, I don't actually mind. I think it's an interesting little set piece, but everything that C-3PO is doing is there. It's just the worst, cringingly bad comedy. Also in inverted commas.
It also was the first time Yoda was done fully CGI.
Thankfully, after the hideous puppet.
Well, yeah. I kind of like the puppet, really.
No,
I'm a realist.
The puppet that they used in Empire and Return of the Jedi, that looked great. The one that they used in Phantom Menace was boss-eyed for a start off. It was just cross-eyed and looked hideous. So as soon as they were able to go back and change that for a CGI Yoda, that was the one time that George Lucas has gone back to his old stuff and actually improved on it.
Cataracts, have I?
Yes.
Yeah.
Got kicked in the head by a donkey, I did. Can't stop focusing on tip of nose, I can't. Yes.
Yes. Also, I mean, not a single clone trooper suit in this movie was actually built. They're all CGI.
Yeah, same goes for Revenge of the Sith as well.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, there's a shot of the clones as Obi-Wan's going through Camino. And there's slightly more grown-up clones where they don't quite look like Tamara Morrison. It's obviously a different actor. And they're eating. There is nothing in any of the dishes. And it's so obvious that there's nothing in any of the dishes.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing you could say about this, at least they cut Jar Jar down. But he is still annoying in the scenes that he was left in. No, and I think that was the backlash of the Phantom Menace. They were like, who the fuck is this? Jar Jar. I remember that backlash. Everyone was like, oh, burn the movie. Burn it. Jar Jar Binks. It was like, all the Ewoks were there were like, phew, it's no longer on us.
The worst thing about that is you watch Ahmed Best in behind-the-scenes stuff for the Phantom Menace, and he's putting his heart and his soul into it. He really believes he's doing this wonderful character acting bit, and the character's going to be great. Oh, I feel so bad for him when everything just came back in and everyone was basically saying, "No, you're terrible. The character's terrible. You all should die, burn in hell." And it's like, Jesus, it's just a frog alien. Calm yourself.
Did you know that NSYNC got cut out of this movie?
Thankfully.
Yes, they apparently played Jedis. And who the thought that idea up?
It's got to be one of George Lucas's kids.
I'm sorry, is George Lucas a secret NSYNC fan?
I don't know.
Can you imagine him driving along Skywalker Ranch in his little golf cart, little radio playing, "It's gonna be me"?
Oh, it's gotta be me. Yeah. Oh, that reminds me. I gotta get in touch with get these guys in the movie. Yeah.
Me, it got to be. For one, I mean, there are some great things about this. I mean, the set pieces are really good. I mean, Christopher Lee versus Yoda, I actually do. I do love that. I've got to admit, it was like, that's pretty cool. I was in the cinema in the moment that Yoda whipped out his little green thing, his lightsaber. Sorry, he whips out his lightsaber and starts fighting. There was an audible like "yay" in the cinema. I was like, okay, yeah, that's cool. I've waited my whole life for a thing on that. Yeah. You know, so the special effects are great. I think the one person that is acting above anyone else in this is Natalie Portman, and what she's got isn't great to work with. But she masters something the rest of the cast don't. It's called movement while performing. Right? She is very aware of the surroundings, which is kind of hard when it's green screen, or blue screen in this case. But when you watch her performance with a truly awful script and the human balsa wood that is Hayden Christensen acting opposite her, they're animals, and I slaughtered them like animals. It actually sounds Mexican there when I do it. That was actually a bit of a better delivery than he did. But she actually did really, really good in it. And when I watched it again this week, I was like, you know what? Credit to her. You know, she really threw herself into it. She didn't have a lot to work with, but she is the one person who was actually working the most. Now, when you look into this movie, there are some very interesting little factoids about it, Steve.
Okay.
They're not all good, but they're not all positive. I'll put it that way. For one, Attack of the Clones has the distinction of being the only Star Wars movie that was not the top grossing film of the year.
Oh.
It lost to Spider-Man, which is understandable.
Oh, yeah, because that was just a behemoth.
Oh, it was just incredible. Not only that, this was the only time a Star Wars movie was released in the same year as a Star Trek movie.
Oh, was it? I want to say Insurrection, but it wasn't.
No, it's the one no one can remember. Nemesis. Yeah. It's the one everyone forgets actually was made because they'd give up on Star Trek by that point. It just kind of was shut out. But yeah, it was
Shattered out.
Shattered out. Yeah.
Yes.
No pinwheeling.
Yes.
No pinwheeling in this movie. But yeah, it's the only time in history a movie from both has been released in the same year. Which is kind of interesting. Yeah. Also, this was the last ever Star Wars movie that was released on VHS.
Yeah, because I think Revenge of the Sith just went straight to DVD, didn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
The dead medium of VHS. This was probably among the last movies ever to come out in cassette form.
I mentioned this on another show, the last one to actually be released on VHS, or at least the last mainstream Hollywood movie, was A History of Violence.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Yes. And what a movie that is. Much better than Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, which was released 20 years ago this week. I actually want to give a little honourable mention to a movie from 30 years ago this week. Alien 3 was released, but we covered that in our Got It Fresh 3 episode, which you can go back and find in our archives.
Yes, and before we move on and introduce our guest, I have one last factoid that I'm going to give myself. I have been to the Troglodyte Hotel, which was then redressed as the Homestead in both A New Hope and in the Star Wars prequel. So I have stood in Luke Skywalker's kitchen.
That's the Tunisia?
Tunisia, yeah.
Ah, very good. Well, I haven't even been there.
Yep.
That's cool.
Yep, and I've also been to the mountain range where the Jawas shoot R2-D2, but that was in a much better film.
Yes, well, I'm going to go to the Ghostbusters firehouse without scaffolding on it, so go f*** yourself.
Anyway, it's time to get back to part 2 of our interview with Cyrus Voris and Ethan Reiff. Well, 1998. You are both creators and writers of what has now become a true classic show by the name of Brimstone, which was, for anyone who doesn't know, it was a series that was focused on a dead cop that was sentenced to hell who returns to Earth by the devil to recover evil spirits, and it's fantastic premise. Where did this all come from?
Thank you. I think it was a movie. It was an abandoned movie idea that we had. Well, what happened is because Tales from the Crypt was Demonite was somewhat successful. You know, you get typecast very easily in Hollywood. So Ethan and I became like, oh, we're horror guys. You guys write horror movies.
Which was okay. We had nothing against horror. We loved horror.
But because of that, and because we worked relatively quickly, we had an agent who kept saying, you guys should do television. You guys should get involved in television. And I think we went around pitching a totally different concept, like an action show, to TV networks. And everybody passed, but kept saying, but you know what? You guys wrote that Tales from the Crypt movie. You should come back with a horror show.
The one thing I'll add, because it was the late 90s, and everybody passed for the same reason. They all said, that's a great show. That's a great idea. We totally get it.
Our action show.
Right.
And
the
after a while,
reason it was all about the timing, because Scream had just come out and sort of injected new life into the horror genre throughout popular culture.
X-Files was a big hit on Fox also at that point. Had been on a couple of seasons and was big. Yeah.
We literally heard that if you came back to us with a horror show, we'd buy it like that, and they'd snap their fingers. And we literally heard that 3 times in a row from 3 different TV networks. And we sort of sat down at lunch and said, this is ridiculous. We should just come up with a horror show and try and sell that to these guys.
And I think Brimstone was a movie idea that we were noodling around with about a cop back from hell to hunt down somebody who had escaped from hell. And was like, well, if it's TV, instead of a guy hunting down one escapee from hell, let's make it hundreds of escapees from hell, and we'll do one for each episode. And that sort of was the notion of that premise. Yeah, and you know, it's funny. We actually stole some stuff from Demonite. A viewer who pays attention will notice that the way the hero in Brimstone dispatches of the damned souls is the exact same way that Bill Sadler kills the demons in Demonite, which is taking out the eyes, the windows to the soul. And then the demons in Demonite, they explode in some cool special effects, and then in Brimstone they get sucked back to hell when you take out their eyes. So
at least we stole from ourselves.
It's not plagiarism if you steal from yourself.
And we're sticking to it. And I remember when Cy and I were in Toronto, Canada, shooting the pilot out on a suburban street, and this kid walked up to me, because it was whatever, I guess it was 1997, and it was still a little bit interesting or unusual or exciting for a movie or TV crew to be on a public street, in Toronto back then. And he was like 12 years old, and he asked me what we were shooting. And I pitched him the show, like the very brief, to the point, bullet points of the show that you just pitched out. And I'll always remember, he looked at me with these like big saucer eyes full of excitement, and with this like reverent hush over his voice, he said, "That's awesome." And I thought to myself, hey, maybe we actually could succeed, because there's like a 12-year-old Canadian kid who thinks it's a really cool idea.
Thinks the show should be on TV.
It could work, yeah.
And that kid went on to be Ryan Reynolds.
It's possible.
It's possible.
Exactly.
We've been doing this a long time.
For any Brimstone super fans out there, that story occurred outside the house where we shot the flashbacks, where Zeke Stone returns to the house he shared with his wife before he was killed in the line of duty, and walks through the empty house and has memory flashes of his wife, who was a beautiful French-Canadian actress, actually.
So the
who
thing
never
that
got to come back to the show, unfortunately.
Yeah, because we shot the show in Los Angeles, but the pilot was shot in Toronto. The thing that I always remember was we talked about before producing and writers. Everything we had written before then, we had only written movies, and so we were, I would say, either not involved in production or slightly involved with production. Actually, I did some storyboards on the Dolph Lundgren movie on Men of War because I used to draw. And so I did some storyboards for action scenes for Perry Lang. And then, I think,
wait, Cy, you shouldn't blow past it that fast. I'll do this really quick, but there's a great anecdote because the Israeli producer of that movie cornered Cy in an elevator once because he had been asking him for weeks to go to Thailand as the onboard storyboard artist to continue adding his sort of like visual choreography action talent to the production as the movie actually went into production. And he courted Cy in the elevator and said, like, why won't you go? Why won't you go to Thailand? I'll pay. It'll be great. That's what I did. That's what I did for Jean-Claude Van Damme. And I said, well, if you're going to turn me into a worldwide action movie star, I'll go to Thailand. But if I'm just going to be working on storyboards for, the production, I don't know that that's really in my best interest.
Yeah, exactly. Cornered by a former Israeli tank commander turned movie producer.
Yeah.
But then
so a great opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. But the point is, we had been
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Exactly. We had been slightly involved in production elements in movies, but again, as we said before, the writer in a movie is the low man on the totem pole. The pilot got greenlit by Fox. We shot the pilot in Toronto, and I remember we were basically producing the pilot, and then we went on to produce the show. But I remember literally going to Toronto and going to, we did a few weeks of prep, and the first day of principal photography, and there's trucks and there's hundreds of people and crew and the cast and everything. And I looked at Ethan and I said, what have we wrought? Look at this. This is all because we had this crazy idea, and now there are like hundreds of people making this crazy pilot that we came up with.
I mean, it had been more than 10 years since first Cy and then I had graduated from NYU, film school, and we had worked in the trenches, and then we had both sort of like just tried to become writers and make a living that way. And it was one of those like overnight success, but not at all, because we had been working really hard for a long time, but we were still relatively young. We were like, I guess, in our very early 30s. And it was just a great experience because, like Cy says, that was the first time for me. I remember being so happy because when I would give someone a copy of, at the time, it was still a VHS tape, I think, with the pilot on it, and I would say, that's what we wanted to do, and we did it. If you like it, that's awesome because we get the credit. If you don't like it, that's okay because we get the blame. And it was the first time in our lives that we've been able to really say that, because we'd actually managed to have a legitimate amount of creative control over how the work was realized and brought to life, which was awesome.
And it also had, it had great acclaim and fanfare. And despite that, Fox ended up cancelling the show after just one season. And in your view, all these years removed, I mean, what led to the downfall of the show so quickly after it had come out? Was it a case of the network changing the time slot and day? Was it not popular with someone higher up? What was your reasoning?
It was a combo. The show was what they call it was a bubble show. The ratings weren't great. They weren't horrible, but
that combined with what I would single out as the single biggest contributing factor to its cancellation, which was the regime change, which is often responsible in Hollywood for the end of projects, either in development or in production or with TV shows, out there in the world.
Yeah, what happened was the people that picked the show up at Fox Network we did our 13 episodes. They actually ordered a back 9. So there was actually, they ordered a full season. So we were going to actually do more episodes. And literally while we were prepping and starting to write and prep the rest of the season order, the regime, as Ethan said, the regime at Fox changed. And the new regime at Fox basically looked at their schedule, looked at all the shows, and said, "What's this crazy devil show? What the hell is this? What is this doing? Nobody watched this show. It's dumb. Let's cancel it." And so they basically rescinded our back order, and we got canceled literally 2 hours into shooting episode 14 of Brimstone.
Man.
Oh, yeah.
We literally had to walk to the set, because then we called up Warner Brothers, who was the studio, and said, "Hey, we got canceled, but, we're going to finish this episode, right?" And there was this pause, and they're like, "No, we're not finishing this episode. We're pulling the plug. We're not spending another dime on this show." And so Ethan and I, along with our lead actor, Peter Horton, we had to basically walk to the set, because we were shooting some part of the lot, Warner Brothers lot, and basically say, "Okay, show's canceled. Everybody pack up. That's it. We're done." And that was the end of the show. Which, in retrospect, I feel like the final episode we did, the 13th episode, is a great ending for that series. But we did have like 9 more episodes planned that never got to be produced.
The one other element or dynamic that was a major contributing factor to that decision process, like Cy just described it in a very diplomatic manner, saying the new regime came in and looked at the shows on their schedule on the board and said, "What's this Brimstone show, this devil show? Nobody watches that. Let's cancel it." That's not really what happened. What happened was the new president came in at the network and looked at the schedule and said, "Okay, this Brimstone show, it's on the bubble. It's not a big success, nor is it a big failure. It's right in the middle. What do we do with it? You guys have the experience. You guys have knowledge about the show from inside this world. What should we do with it?" And unfortunately for us and the show, our lead actor, the star of the show, Peter Horton, who went on to be a very successful television director, has directed a lot of big successful TV pilots, including Grey's Anatomy and a bunch of other shows. He had made the lives of the network executives at Fox who dealt with our show a living hell, because he had his own sort of picadillos about the way the show was produced and the way the show looked and the way the show was presented. And he had issues with us, but he also, unbeknownst to us, had been going around us and taking his issues directly to the network. And when that question was poised by the new president of Fox, what do we do with this show? It's on the bubble. The people who he had made their lives a bit of a living hell said, "Cancel it, because we want to be done with that, dealing with this situation." So that's a little more of the reality. Yeah.
Well, you've got the diplomatic version and the non-diplomatic version. They're both true. It was a combination of those things.
Well, no, I mean, that's all true, except there's the diplomatic version and the true version. So, whatever.
It was also true that the ratings were not great enough to...
It was, and I included that because, the ratings weren't great, but they weren't terrible.
The point
either.
is that what you find doing television, unless you have a breakout hit show, there are a lot of factors involved. And one of the factors involved is this a show that people in the network, is a show they like? Is it a show, do they like the people working on the show? Do they like the stars? Is it an easy, when they get a call from the set, is it a call they look forward to, or is it a call they dread? So I think,
or do they get a call at the network where the star producer tells them to meet him for color timing at the color timing facility, because he's not happy with the way the director of photography and the executive producers have been color timing the show.
Trust me, no network president wants to sit in a color timing booth. They all have better things to do. So the bottom line is that, again, if your show's not a big hit, there are a lot of factors involved in whether a show continues or does not continue. And some of them are personal. So it is what it is. The only way to get around that is to have a show that's either a huge critical success or a big financial success.
Well, this is 20th Century Fox, the network that cancelled not only Firefly, but Family Guy twice. So who really knows? Yeah.
Exactly.
Find out more next week when Peter Horton joins us on Bollywood.
Oh, that's
he would tell you the same. He would tell you the same thing. Oh, those bastards.
No, he would tell you, you guys won't
understand
how badly the show was being color timed by those imbeciles. If I showed you the blue that they were letting out onto the airwaves, you would instantly understand.
Yeah, exactly. Here's the last thing I'll say about that. I think Ethan and I and Peter, as the star of the show, had a lot of tension in our creative relationship, but I feel that ultimately it made the show more interesting. I think if Ethan and I had our druthers, the show would have been much more genre-y, a little bit more pulpy, much more more leaning into horror and more leaning into the genre elements. Peter really wasn't interested in that. He was interested in this a lot of character stuff, a lot of character nuance, the idea of oh, here's a guy who's been dead for 15 years, he's been in hell, what's his life like now? And I think that tension creatively between us, when I go back and I look at the show again, it provided a lot of great stuff that alone neither of us would have come up with. If Peter had his way, there would be no action or horror in the show. It would just be a dead guy walking around for 90 minutes. And if Ethan and I may have, again, pushed more into the action horror genre things, but I think that friction made the show much more interesting and maybe more idiosyncratic and ultimately more memorable, I think.
The problem is now that people listening to this won't have a chance to actually check it out unless they saw it the first time around or perhaps have got hold of it via nefarious means, because it's not available on any home video formats. It's not available on streaming. Yeah. So have you pushed for its release, maybe through HBO, or what kind of response have you had from this?
It fell between the cracks. It slipped between the cracks. It was
we missed a great DVD window. There was a period where basically when the DVD market was exploding, everything was coming out on DVD.
Yeah.
And I think by the time, and if you look at these old lists, Brimstone was always in the top 5 shows not on DVD that should be on DVD. And then I think when the market changed from DVD to streaming, for whatever reason, it just missed that window. It's frustrating to me because it's the only thing we've written that's not available in any format, that's not either on DVD or on Blu-ray or streaming in some form. Yeah, it is languishing in the vaults of Warner Brothers, and hopefully at some point, at some day before we all keel over, it'll come out. But that's unfortunately what it is. I know there's bootleg DVDs you can buy. So what can I tell you?
I think that was alluded That was alluded to with the nefarious.
Yeah, since Warner's is not, I don't mind pissing off Warner Brothers since they haven't put it out. So I'll promo the many bootleg releases of Brimstone that you can find on eBay or whatever you are.
Yeah, you used to be able to watch a lot of the episodes on YouTube. Actually, I don't know if that's still the case. I haven't looked for years, but
around this time, you both also worked for the cult movie home Full Moon Entertainment for a number of scripts, including Josh Kirby Time Warrior, which was kind of I guess it was a movie serial in a way. So being fans of sci-fi and horror, was Full Moon just a blast for you both creatively?
Charlie Band, Ethan, does Charlie still owe us money? I'm trying to remember.
Not much. Much less than he owes a lot of other people. We got out of there financially largely intact. He only owed us like $5,000 when he was shut down with the cease and desist order by Paramount
Yeah,
Pictures.
I'm sure he's had several of those. Here's the thing. Here's the thing about Charles Band and Full Moon and we talked about that sort of fallow period in genre entertainment in the first half of the 90s. If you went to your Blockbuster or your local video store, there was always a Charlie Band, and you were like starved for genre entertainment. You had Puppet Master 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. You had Trancers. You had, and some of his really good stuff. Charlie was a producer on Reanimator, which is a classic.
That was a previous iteration as Empire
Entertainment. But Charlie kept genre filmmaking going through the first half of the 90s when the studios weren't doing it. So if you wanted to do horror movies or sci-fi movies at that period, almost everybody worked for Charlie Band, for Full Moon Entertainment. And Charlie also was a big comic book guy. So we went in and we got a general meeting at Charlie's company, probably off of the script for Demonite, and Charlie had a bunch of old comic books lying around called Time Master from DC in the 50s. And I'm a big comic book guy, so he's like, oh yeah, I remember that. And Charlie says, yeah, I want to do something like this, but we can't actually do Time Master because Warner Brothers owns that. I just want to do my own version. This was like Charlie famously was a big fan of Doctor Strange, and so he basically ripped off Doctor Strange and did his own version called Dr. Mordred.
I remember that.
So do I.
But the thing is, Charlie was
poster.
Yeah, but the thing is, Charlie was honest about it. He was just like, yeah, see this? We're gonna rip this off, and so we were young writers, and we're like, okay, can we come up with a version or some of our, obviously we want to come up with as much of our own stuff as possible, but can we come up with something like this that's different enough that it's original, but it's inspired by a guy going through time? And then he wanted to do, he had this great idea. He was starting a kids line, Full Moon. I think it was called Moonbeam was the label. And he had this, I think, very ahead of its time idea of like, hey, I'm going to do a series of movies and we'll put them out in the video store like every 2 weeks or every month. So your kids come in and they'll see the first one, and then there'll be another one out like the next month. And I think originally, Ethan, there was supposed to be 10 movies, wasn't it? I think we wrote outlines for 10 movies.
Yeah. It ended up being 6. Yeah.
But it was fun. It was just antics. It was fun. Again, we were very young. I think it came out a little later because of Charlie's legal issues or whatever with Paramount.
They all came out before Brimstone. What started us out over there at Full Moon was actually the screenplay for Demonite. There was a young guy about our same age who was in charge of development for Charlie, and he loved the script to Demonite, and he tried to convince Charlie to actually make it, to buy, for Full Moon to buy it and make it, and it was outside of Charlie's sort of like vision for what his company was going to be, but he finally convinced Charlie that he should meet with us, the guys who had written that script, and talk to us about his ideas, because really everything that got made by his company, even though it was dozens unto hundreds of projects, came directly from his mind and directly from his memory of comic books and genre movies that he had read or seen in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so we had that meeting that Cy was talking about, which was interesting. We drove over to the studio lot, which was in Glendale, which is kind of like a sort of small suburban / industrial city, a little bit north of just north of Los Angeles, whatever. And we parked outside, and I'm sort of like a big history and politics guy. And I noticed that there was an American flag flying over this small mini studio lot, whatever, and a Romanian flag flying. And I remember saying to Cy, that's interesting. Why does this guy have a Romanian flag?
What's happening?
And then as time went on and we got into business, when they hired us to write first Dr. Mordred 2 and 3, which never got made, unfortunately.
We wrote
and
two
also all
unproduced
those
sequels to Dr. Mordred, yes.
And also all those Josh Kirby movies. We learned that right after the fall of Ceausescu in Romania, Charlie had like taken a lot of champagne, U.S. cash, and bread, and flown like to feed people with, loaves of bread, and flown over to whatever Bucharest, and then like made a deal to buy like a 50% ownership stake in the Romanian National Film Works. And that was the key.
Brilliant.
That was the key to his production slate, pipeline.
Everything shot in
being
Romania.
so
all
cheap
those movies, yeah.
and productive. Yeah.
That's brilliant.
In fact, when we did Josh Kirby, there was it was supposed to be Suburban America, USA, like I'll call Spielberg Suburbia, right? And so Charlie, they built a American suburban cul-de-sac in Romania with houses and like that, like that sort of classic Spielberg suburb. And apparently they had issues because Romanians were moving into the suburb, to the fake houses and the streets. And they kept having to come in and chase people out every morning when they were going to be shooting, because there were like people just living in these places. So
one other anecdote from that production, which we were just here in LA while it was ramping up and preparing to shoot, and we had this one pre-production meeting where the line producer was really freaking out and sort of not yelling at us, but desperate for us to change some details, because the first movie in the series involved sort of a collection of displaced people from across time, from different periods of history, who sort of like formed this ensemble guest cast around the main character hero kid. And one of them was a World War I flying ace with a biplane. And the line producer was going crazy because I'll always remember he said to us, "There's one operable biplane in Romania, and they use it to deliver the mail. There's no way we can have access to a biplane." And that was an interesting moment.
The last thing I'll say about that I remember was we got dailies back from the movie, and all the smaller parts, like let's say the villains' minions or like the townspeople, all like the secondary roles, were played by Romanians in these thick Romanian accents, like barely understandable English. And we kept thinking, well, you're going to redub that stuff later, right? Yeah, sure. They never redubbed it. That would have cost too much money. So when you watch the Josh Kirby series, everybody beyond the principals all are strangely speaking in these thick Bela Lugosi accents. Which, anyhow, that's the wacky story of Josh Kirby Time Warrior.
No, there's one other story from that era that's even arguably worse than the heavy accents by the supporting cast, which was Charlie's father, Albert Band, who was the grand old man of the company, who had been an assistant director for such, filmmakers as John Huston, like back in the day, and then gone on, I believe, to direct one spaghetti western in Spain, perhaps.
Right, under the name Alberto Bandini. That was his fake Italian name. Albert Band
only
turned
one.
It around. Wait, Ethan. Albert Band turned it around because normally spaghetti westerns were directed by Italians who would take on American names, like, directed by, Joe Winston or John McIntyre. But Albert was an American directing spaghetti westerns and giving himself a fake Italian name.
Yeah, which is a very original approach. So we wrote and oversaw, in a writing sense, as like the head writers of the series of these sort of like serialized, pulp movies, 6 of these separate chapters, and they were all intimately serialized from chapter 1 to 2 to 3 through 6, right? And then Jurassic Park came out, and we had dinosaurs, time-displaced dinosaurs in the second chapter, which was called like Planet of the Dino-Nites. But that entire chapter, that entire self-contained movie stood, as chapter 2, which couldn't exist until in a rational mind of a viewer until after you'd seen chapter 1, which set up the entire universe, right? Which was called The Human Pets. Okay. So Albert Band decided that kids love dinosaurs after the Jurassic Park box office came in, without consideration that, that involved tens of millions of dollars in special effects budgets and the visionary filmmaking skills of Steven Spielberg or whatever. He just said, kids love dinosaurs. And he basically cut the first half of the second movie, which introduced the dinosaur plot, together with the first half of the first movie, and retitled the first movie Planet of the Dino-Nites, and then took the second half of the first movie and moved it after the second half of the second movie and made that The Human Pets or whatever. And we were like, this is unbelievable. At least, like Cy said, you're going to, what we had said to them, you're going to ADR, you're going to redub those voices. And they were like, of course. What do you think we are? Incompetent nincompoops? And we said, you guys are going to at least do some insert shots or transitions or at least some ADR dialogue to explain these unfathomable, chaotic transitions. And we got the same, of course, we're not amateurs. Of course we are. And then they released it and there was nothing. It was literally take the first half of this movie and glue it together to the first half of the other movie, and then take the second half of the second movie and glue it together to the second half of the first movie. It was surreal. It was a surreal experience.
Yeah. Literally, if you could just imagine just cutting halves of movies together and gluing them together and just putting them out in the theater, it really it made no sense.
In order to get dinosaurs into the first chapter, which may have been a somewhat legitimate marketing decision, but at least follow through and spend 10 cents on trying to cover up these incomprehensible, transitions that make no sense. Oh man. I haven't thought about it in a long time, but
no, I think maybe if you watch these movies now and you're stoned, maybe they're sort of fun. and the fact that wait a minute, why are there dinosaurs now in this movie? I don't understand. Maybe that would be cool. I don't know. Very postmodern.
Well, that was another project we worked on where the release got sort of caught up in transactional/legal issues because Charlie's company got shut down by the legal authorities here in Los Angeles before those movies were released on home video. And the rights were bought by somebody else. I don't remember, Alliance or somebody who released them. And when that happened, I actually had a glimpse of a possibility of hope that, some cooler head would prevail and they'd look at those transitions in those first two chapters and spend, I don't know, a few thousand or a few tens of thousands of dollars to re-record some ADR dialogue or make some tiny cutting adjustments. But no, they didn't do anything.
No, the director of Tammy and the T-Rex pretty much scooped all of that footage up.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
But from there, I mean, you both also turn in drafts for another horror icon showdown, which was Freddy versus Jason, working. Yeah, I knew you'd get it in.
There you go, Steve.
All of my cats in the room, suddenly their ears just went up. So you're working there with the producer, Sean S. Cunningham. And obviously these two franchises, it was a very anticipated showdown ever since the days of, I think it was Jason Goes to Hell or something like that. So you turned in a script. How was your script different from what ultimately went ahead?
I think it's totally different. Here's the thing.
Pretty different.
That movie was in development for ages. I think, there's an old saying, or there's this old, I don't know, wives' tale. I don't know, there's this old thing about like always have $1 in your pocket, because then no matter how poor you are, you still got that dollar in your pocket. Freddy versus Jason was the dollar in New Line's pocket. They were developing that script for years, and they never made it because they always knew that as long as they had that in their pocket, they still had a surefire commercial hit. And so they delayed making it for years and just spent endless monies on scripts and development. I mean, Ethan, I think when the movie finally got made, we got a thing from the Writers Guild to see if, like, well, do you want to try to get credit?
If you're involved in a project, in a movie, and you were paid to write a draft and your name is on, or your names in our case, plural, are on the cover page, and then the movie gets made, if there are 4 or more names on the credit list of writers who got their names on the front page, on the cover page of Screenplay's versions of that project, it automatically the credit determination has to go to an arbitration, which is this sort of like formalized process that the Writers Guild conducts in-house to see what the fairest and according to the rules of the Writers Guild credit guide, how the credit should be determined. And we got a package of material from the Writers Guild when this process was going on. And the thing is, I don't think any of the writers had asked for it. Nobody was arguing over what the credit should be. And there were literally like 15 different entities, 15 writing entities, partnerships, and single writers. It was like 2 or 3 giant packages, because back then they still sent hard copies of scripts for people to read. They didn't just email everything to everyone or send a link to the cloud. And we got these giant stacks with copies of all the different drafts, which we were supposed to read and decide, do we want to argue that we deserved some kind of shared credit for the movie? And I don't think we read any of that. Maybe we flipped through the last version, which was the version that was actually, coming out, and there was so little to nothing of what we had written years earlier that we certainly didn't arbitrate or ask for shared credit. It was just memorable because there were lists of names of like everybody in Hollywood who'd ever written a horror film, because over that development process, they had hired so many writers to write and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite various different versions of that project, with different directors involved and different producers involved over the course of many years.
Yeah, the one thing that I think we came up with that is not in the finished movie, but I think I remember from our version, was we had this notion of tying the origins of Freddy and Jason, tying the franchises together. And so what we came up with, which is really horrifying and twisted and quite perverse, was that in the Jason mythos, Jason was a kid at Camp Crystal Lake who drowned, and his mom came back for revenge against the counselors who had sort of like neglectfully let her son drown. So, and then Freddy was a child killer.
Oh, a child molester, we could say.
Yeah, well, they were always sort of vague about, did he molest the kids? Did he just kill them? What was the deal? So what we did is in our version, Freddy was actually a young camp counselor at Camp Crystal Lake, and he had molested Jason, and then he drowned Jason so that Jason wouldn't tell anybody that Freddy had molested him. And so when Jason comes back and he's killing all these counselors, he's really just trying to kill Freddy, because Freddy's the guy that actually killed Jason all those years ago. So that was our that was our contribution, which is not, I'm sure, not in the final movie. Way too twisted. But that was the one thing we did in our crazy draft of Freddy versus Jason.
It certainly would have made Jason a more sympathetic character going forward from that.
Yeah. Speaking for myself, as somebody who went away to Boy Scout camp in the summers of my youth, it seemed like the natural, organic way to connect the origin stories of the two horror icons.
Yeah.
The one thing I remember about that, to me, the most memorable thing about that process, working with Sean S. Cunningham, who's a really terrific guy and a really a fun guy. Sean did something which I thought was totally sweet and totally crazy at the same time. When we finished our script, he got together a bunch of actors. He basically had a table reading, a staged reading with actors and producers, everything, of Jason versus Freddy. Now, it's one thing to have a stage reading of like a Shakespeare movie or a Sidney Lumet drama or the latest Wes Anderson movie, but Freddy versus Jason, the table read was mostly people going ah, ah. And I think Ethan, I read somebody reading, Freddy chops off the guy's head with his claws. I mean, it was hilarious. It was absolutely insane, but because Sean was such a sweet guy and he was like, oh, this is great. And it's a script and we're going to learn so much from the table read. It was a really cool thing. I mean, it was absurd, but it was also great. So that's my great memory.
Yeah, I
Freddy
mean,
versus
honestly,
Jason.
I never saw it as absurd. I just appreciated, I mean, it is a piece of written material and we'll get to hear it and we'll get to make some tweaks and adjustments to things that don't ring true or sound the best they can be. It was cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose if you take things off the page, then it brings a whole new life to it. And speaking of things that are off the page...
Nice segue.
Thank you, Andrew. We're going to move on to one of Andrew's favourite topics of all time, Chow Fat.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Andrew has good taste. Has good taste.
So,
my hero.
You two both land the job of writing the comic book adaptation of Bulletproof Monk, which was rumoured around the time of the writing to be directed by John Woo, which, when teamed with Chow, would have been gold once more. So, was this potential reunion a huge draw for you for both signing on to write the project?
That's the only... Honestly, that's one and all only reason we did sign on to write the project. We were recruited to write that project at a dinner where the producer, Terrence Chang, who was partners with John Woo,
genius,
invited us to have dinner with him and Chow Fat. We didn't even know. He brought the comic book to dinner and pulled it out to say, hey, we're interested. Would you guys have any, would you want to? And we were like, I mean, in all honesty, if he had pulled out a kitchen sink and said, we're interested in you guys turning this kitchen sink into a movie that Chow Fat sitting beside me and eating with you guys can star in, we would have said, that's amazing. Where do we sign? That's a fantastic idea, Which is nothing against the comic book or the source material. It's just that it was all about Chow Fat for us from the very, very beginning, that project.
Yeah, I want to back it up and say Ethan and I were huge Hong Kong movie fans from the mid-'80s. Because we were both in New York, and you could still go to New York's Chinatown. There were 3 movie theaters, and we got all the movies from Hong Kong on double bills at these Chinese movie theaters. And Ethan and I would go down to see these movies. We got turned on to them. There was an article in Film Comment about a Toronto Film Festival that played a bunch of Hong Kong movies. That was like, oh, interesting, in like 85 or 86. And then we had a friend of ours.
Yeah, I had a friend who gave me a VHS copy of Better Tomorrow. And I started to watch it. I started to watch it at home alone. And I stopped after I got to about maybe 10 or 15 minutes. It might be the scene where the mob assassins come to take out the family, and the dad uses like a frying pan of scalding water to try and defend them. And I pushed pause or stop, and I called Cy I think he was at work, and I said, you have to come to my place when you get out of work, because I'm going to rewind this movie to the start. It's been on for like 10 minutes. we have to watch it together from beginning to end. It's amazing. And he showed up. I rewound it, and we watched the movie, and it just blew our minds in a sense, you know.
Right. And the thing was, it was a friend of ours who was a Chinese American guy whose his parents were born in China and spoke Chinese, spoke Cantonese in the household, and they were watching these Hong Kong movies, and I guess his mom or his brother had watched this movie and said, "Oh, it's really good." And he said to Ethan, like, "Yeah, you know, this movie's supposed to be good. I don't know. Check it out. Tell me if it's any good." And that was Better Tomorrow. So we started going to.
I don't think his parents weren't watching them. His parents watched soap operas from Hong Kong TV. It was just he had heard friends of his who were like movie guys had said like, "Oh, you got to watch this," and he was reticent because I think he had a sort of, you know, first generation child of immigrants reticence or hesitation to fully embrace something from, you know, from his cultural homeland or whatever, which is sometimes the case. And so he gave it to me and said, I don't know, they say people are telling me that I should check this out, but it's hard for me to believe it's really going to be that good. You watch it and tell me or whatever. And it just blew our minds
so we basically started going to Chinatown and watching all these Chow Fat movies, John Woo movies, Jackie Chan movies, and we were like pretty much the only the only Westerners in these Chinese movie theaters.
What really grabbed us and hit us and struck us so powerfully watching those movies was the genre blending, because remember, this is like in the mid to late 80s, before
pre-Tarantino.
Yeah, and just pre a lot of pop culture movie making paradigm shifts and new waves of style, and the idea of crashing together distinct genres inside a movie that took itself somewhat seriously and was well made was like groundbreaking. I remember when Cy and I first met John Woo, before they invited Terrence Chang invited us to dinner with Chow Fat. We had met John Woo at the offices of the company he shared with Terrence Chang, and I remember saying to him that seeing his movies for us was like seeing the French New Wave for Martin Scorsese. You know, it was like a kind of like a revelation of, oh, the things that you think about doing or dream about doing are maybe possible. Because even Demonite, which was the first thing Cy and I had ever written together, one of the things I think that's special about it and has enabled it to sort of live on with this like strong fan base and cult following over 25 plus years is that, yes, it's a horror film and it delivers on the horror expectation front, but it's also a hero film. It's also a movie with its hero side in a sort of like a big way, which at the time was a little bit original. I'm not saying it had never been, you know, tried or done before, but it was a little bit original. And that genre blending, we saw that every time we went to a Hong Kong movie theater in New York City, Chinatown. And, you know, we went to see the movies. We went out of our way to see the movies made by the best, the most outstanding filmmaker, director guys from Hong Kong. Sometimes those would be paired up with more mediocre, run-of-the-mill programmers from Hong Kong. But we did our best to see the best of that material, and it was just different from anything we'd seen. It was delivering on sort of tried and true commercial genre filmmaking expectations, and also filled with just heaps of sort of like spontaneity, inspiration, and this kind of like almost subversive energy and surprise, you know, and it just blew our minds. And it was kind of an inspiration to us when we started out in the early days of writing our first screenplays. So then being able to meet John Woo and tell him that was pretty awesome, I have to say.
So the thing about meeting Chow Fat is the first thing I want to say a few things. The first thing is that Chow Fat, when you meet movie stars and you work in the business, it's interesting. You talk about the magic of film, okay? Some movie stars come in and they seem like normal people. And yet when the camera turns on, they become these big icons on the screen. But when you see them in real life, they're sort of like normal people. And they're sort of like, oh, okay, that's weird. That's interesting. Chow Fat is a guy, he's the other type of movie star. He walks into a room and basically everybody's like, who's that guy? He's tall, he's charming. He's just one of these guys that's so charismatic in real life that you're like, holy crap, if this guy isn't a movie star, he should be a movie star. The other thing about Chow Fat, and I think one of the big things we wanted to do with Bulletproof Monk, which I think we achieved, was that, as Ethan said, we had seen all these Hong Kong movies. We'd seen Chow Fat basically do everything. He did action, he did comedy, he did romance, he was funny, he did serious drama. And up to that point, all of his American movies had been just, he's like the Chinese Steve McQueen. He says like 3 words in a movie and he fires a gun. And we knew Chow Fat can be funny. He can be charming. He can be moving. He can do all this stuff. So our real goal in doing Bulletproof Monk, in addition to doing a fun action movie, was to really show off Chow Fat's range and all the crazy things he can do. And I think to this day, I think that's still, to me, the best thing about the movie is it's the only American movie that Chow Fat is in where he's actually funny and he's actually charming in that sort of way he is in tons of Hong Kong movies, but virtually none of his American movies. The other thing is that part of the challenge was the Bulletproof Monk comic book. The Bulletproof Monk is not in the comic book. So this was an interesting writing challenge.
Yeah, he's a mythic, legendary figure, sort of, in the shadows, and not in the shadows like you catch a glimpse of him,
in the sort of like he's a myth. So the first thing was that, we have to actually put the Bulletproof Monk in the story, and we have to create that character for Chow Fat to play. So again, that was great also because we could craft that character to make it fun and charming and entertaining and do all that cool stuff that Chow Fat had not got to do in an American English language movie up to that point.
Okay, Ethan and Cy, why are hot dogs sold in packs of 10, but hot dog buns only sold in packs of 8?
So you can always have... No, what are you talking about? Anybody who's seen the movie knows. Because that way, you can always have a hot dog.
Another hot
no
dog.
Matter what else, no matter how many other profound life challenges you may be facing, you can always have a hot dog.
There you go.
Now we know who wrote that line.
Full.
Yeah, Ethan is a big hot dog buff.
He's going to be all over Grace Papaya then, isn't he?
Yeah. I mean, I like Grace Papaya, but, they tried to open one in L.A. and it died really fast.
A tragedy.
Which was a pity, but...
I'm probably the worst person for this, because I did actually visit New York a few years ago, went to Grace Papaya and just thought, this just tastes like a hot dog. I was expecting this wonderful, life-changing experience, and it was just like, it's just a hot dog.
We have the LA version.
No, but it had the... But what about the crack? What about the stiff skin crack, and the heat. Yeah, when you take your bite, because it's particularly...
I was going to say, Steve, did you buy crack in New York?
I did not buy crack in New York, no.
That's just a condiment that can be added depending on where you're
at. Well, the LA version of that is Pink's, which again is a huge tourist thing in LA.
No, Pink's
I had that.
Pink's is, in my opinion, Pink's is very overrated. I would go for Fab Dogs or Carney's are the two outstanding hot dog spots in Los Angeles.
So how did a movie like this, with John Woo potentially directing, suddenly switch to Paul Hunter, who may have had an extensive music video background but had never directed a movie before?
Honestly, that's the first time, speaking for myself, I don't know about Cy, I've never heard the rumor that there was a possibility that John Woo was actually going to direct it before. I mean, I don't think that was presented to us when we started out. He was always a producer. I don't know that was really a thing.
Well, I mean, look,
Cy?
David Fincher came from directing music videos. Especially in the '90s, it was a big thing, and Paul Hunter was like the hottest music video director
Yeah,
at that
every
time.
studio wanted to make a movie with Paul Hunter. It was actually a very big deal for the project moving forward when Paul Hunter read the script and said, "Oh, this is what I want to do." You know, he had like lots of other projects to choose from for better or worse, whatever.
The only thing I'll say about Paul Hunter doing Bulletproof Monk is that he had the script was very, I would say, somewhat edgy and subversive. When we pitched it, it was actually, we sort of pitched it as Train Spotting meets Indiana Jones with Kung Fu.
Wow.
And it had a very subversive vibe to it, and as Ethan says, would refer to like sort of a genre mashup, and it was definitely R-rated. And Paul came on board, and Paul had done these super edgy music videos for, like, he did the American Woman video for Lenny Kravitz. He had done a ton of these super edgy, super cool music videos, and that's why they hired him to do the movie. Paul came in and said, "You know what? I want to make this a 4-quadrant movie. I want to make this like a Spielberg movie for the family." And we were like, "Okay, that's an interesting approach." I think the studio was like, "Okay," but I think they didn't really believe him. They were like, "No, he's still going to do this super cool, edgy action movie with this edgy stuff. I mean, he just did Lenny Kravitz videos. It's going to be cool." And Paul was like very clear, no, I want to make this a family movie. So as a result, you have, I would say, the only martial arts action movie that is universally beloved by 12-year-old girls and middle-aged women, their mothers. It's a very sweet, friendly, and again, the script is not that, it's not that different. You realize, like, Paul had a very strong point of view, so he basically sort of just pulled out a lot of the edgier stuff. Script's still very much the same. It's just the approach to it was totally the opposite of the way I think it was sort of written, and I think the way the studio thought Paul was going to approach it. But Ethan and I were there the whole time. It was like Paul was not, he didn't trick anybody. He said, "I want to do it this way," and they were like, "Yeah, sure, that sounds great, Paul." But I just don't think they believed him. And so everybody was sort of shocked at the end that it's this very, like, family friendly sort of movie, which ironically is almost a segue. I don't want to throw your order off, but it's almost a segue to Kung Fu Panda, because I think the script for Bulletproof Monk and sort of the vibe on it and the buzz that was coming out
before it was released. Before
it was released was sort of how we ended up going to DreamWorks and getting involved in Kung Fu Panda. And really, the joke is the finished movies are not that dissimilar in a crazy way, because they're both sort of family-friendly martial arts movies.
Except one has Jack Black. Skadoosh!
Yes! Skadoosh!
Yeah. Well, maybe get into 2005 here. You kind of hit gold with the series Sleeper Cell, which was presented on Showtime. And it garnered you both dozens of industry award nominations, including, I guess, what was your first ever Emmy nomination. Now, how did this idea come to be?
That's a good question. Neither of us has told this story in a long time. Actually, what happened was we had a much more traditional kind of counterterrorism police procedural show that we had developed with a journalist who had worked in that world, and we took it around town pitching it. And this was, I guess, 2003/2004, so just a couple of years after the 9/11, terrorist attacks in the U.S. and still in the early days of what's come to be known as the global war on terror. And we went to all these places, and we would get the phone call after we left, and our agent would say, "They love you, they love your your passion, but they're not going to buy the show. It's just not, they're not comfortable with this material. They want you to come back with something a little less extreme," which I guess it counted as extreme because it was somewhat ripped from the headlines and dealing with the terrorism issues that were just part of life at that time. And we went to lunch, and I remember we got off the phone with our agent, and we were just kind of pissed off. And somehow our reaction to them telling us, or the potential buyer, the potential network telling us this is too edgy and too extreme, even though we had taken this edgy material and refitted it into a very tried and true conventional police procedural structure and format. And we sort of looked at each other, and somehow we said, like, fuck them. We should just go balls to the wall and do the most extreme version of this story, which is just follow a undercover counterterrorism guy inside the belly of the beast of the closest we can create to a real world Islamic extremist terror cell, and see what the they say about that. And we went, and I don't know, soon after we talked about it more, and we sort of like developed the idea a little more ourselves. And then for some reason, we were at the building where our agency was, and we went in to see our TV agent. I guess we were excited about the idea, and even though the other idea had just crapped out recently, and we went in to see him, and he was like, "Well, what is it? What do you want to talk to me about?" And we pitched it to him, and he said, "That's great. We have to sell that. We'll sell that. That's great." Which was kind of a little bit of a surprise, but was a great surprise. We were prepped for more of a confrontation with him. Like, he would say, "You're crazy. That's so over the top. That's so beyond the pale of what anybody's going to do."
It's just too edgy and too realistic. I will say, I just want to jump in and say, I think Ethan is a New Yorker. I spent 10 years in New York and used to take the PATH train to the World Trade Center all the time. So we both had very visceral, like the rest of the world, but very visceral personal reactions to 9/11. And we kept thinking, like, God, we should do something about this. And I would also say, and I don't think we've talked about this before, Ethan.
Oh, the 24 thing?
Yeah. Sleeper Cell was sort of created as a direct response to 24, because 24, whatever you love it, hate it, whatever, 24, especially in its early seasons, really dealt with terrorism in this sort of comic book James Bond sort of fantasy way. And I think Ethan and
with the and I'll just jump in and say, with the Icelandic terrorists.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Ethan and I really hated 24 because it was just absolute horseshit. And it was sort of like, here's an all-American white guy fighting usually all-American, or like Ethan says, Icelandic terrorists. It was just absolute horseshit. And we were just sort of like, let's do a fucking real terrorism show. Let's do a show. And then also, honestly, we were sort of like, I always say the catch-22, I'll use that term again, about 9/11 was that, and I'll use myself as an example. I don't think Ethan's like this. Ethan was very worldly and into international things and knew a lot. I didn't know anything about Islam. And then 9/11 forced me to sort of learn about it. And I think that was another thing for me. I remember one of my heroes as a kid was Muhammad Ali. And I remember Muhammad Ali coming out the days after 9/11 and saying, "Hey, I'm a Muslim. This is not what Islam is all about." And I was like, fuck, that's really fascinating. And so we sort of tried to put all this stuff in an entertaining suspense thriller drama with Sleeper Cell, and we really lucked out in this way with Showtime, because I was telling the story just recently. At that period, Showtime was sort of a distant second in the cable world to HBO. But HBO had just lost all their big shows. The Sopranos was gone, Sex and the City was gone, 6 Feet Under was gone. So suddenly, Showtime had this mandate to like, hey, if we spend a little more money and we do a little more quality, and we don't shoot out everything in Canada, and we actually really get serious, we have a shot to seriously compete with HBO, because all their big shows have left the air. And so we lucked out in our timing when we walked into Showtime with this incredibly edgy, ambitious idea that a lot of people thought we were crazy to even pitch this. Nobody's going to put this on the air. Showtime was sort of the right place at the right time, because they saw this was like, And I always remember when we made the pilot to Sleeper Cell and we did a test screening, Showtime executives were ecstatic, because they did this test screening for an audience, and they asked everybody in the focus group what network they thought had made this show. And everybody said, oh, this is HBO. This is an HBO series. And Showtime was like, yes, we finally did a show that people think should be on HBO. They were very excited by that.
No, and it ended up, that relationship ended up being very much a win-win, because it was great for us. They took a chance on our somewhat extreme or unconventional, show. And it did pay off for them, because, there was like New York Times editorials about the show. And like you mentioned before, the show garnered lots and lots of award nominations, and maybe won like 1 or 2 awards. And it just helped to further legitimize Showtime as like an A-list, TV drama player in the same league as HBO. We were at the exact same. We started the same season for them, so to speak. I don't know. There really was a season, but the same year as Weeds, and Weeds was what sort of like made the big impact for them, I guess, on the more comedy or dramedy side, and we made something of an impact. Critically speaking, we made a real impact on the drama side. Unfortunately, we didn't make as big of an impact, on the commercial success side, which there's various reasons, we could ascribe that to. But so we only lasted for 2 seasons, but we the two of us were very happy with those 2 seasons. It was backbreaking work for us, but it was also very fulfilling, and we felt very proud of it.
Yeah, it was definitely. I just want to jump in and say it's funny, because Ethan talks about the commercial thing. The show was never a commercial success. I think it was ahead of its time. It was too edgy. It was too raw. People didn't want to see something about terrorism that was so realistic. I think that's why 24 was so big, because it was like a fantasy. My favorite story about that is that we had about sort of I would say the undeclared rivalry with 24 and Sleeper Cell. We had there was a guy that we worked with who did some graphics, who did like the computer graphics, when like you go on the FBI computer and there's all these graphics about what's happening. The guy that created those graphics worked on Sleeper Cell. He also worked on 24. And he told us this story because the New York Times had the first review for Sleeper Cell that came out in the New York Times. The headline was, "Sleeper Cell is better than 24." And that was the headline, right? And then it went on to be very positive review. And this guy who worked on both shows told the story that in the coffee room, some disgruntled employee at 24 had cut out the New York Times review, and blown it up and pasted it on the board in the coffee room. Sleeper Cell is better than 24. And apparently, one of the producers of 24 walked in, saw that, and said, Sleeper Cell, I got a 7-figure deal, and ripped it off the wall and threw it in the trash. And that really is basically, 24 were all the guys with 7-figure deals, and then we were doing Sleeper Cell. And that's sort of like, I epitomized the situation. But it was a really, it was a terrific, and we're still actually friends with most of the actors, producers, technical advisors. It was a real special show to work on, and again, a real benchmark in our careers. And again, it was weird. It's like sort of like being in the Army. It's like you go through this experience, and then you're sort of friends with these people for life. So we sort of have that similar relationship with a lot of people who worked on that show. So
it was a unique show in more ways than one, because it ran each night over the course of 2 weeks. Instead of your regular weekly format. So was this a conscious decision from the off, or was it something that was arrived at later on? What was the reasoning behind the decision?
That, as I recall, I mean, it wasn't a conscious decision from the off, as you well put it. It was a decision, an in-house decision by like the programming and marketing teams at Showtime as a strategy for how to have like the greatest impact and grab the biggest audience. I guess they felt like it was, and again, I'm not saying this myself, I'm saying what their opinion was at the time. It was so compelling, and the sort of like inherent cliffhanger nature of the episodes was such that maybe they'd be able, by putting it out that way, they just get the audience to keep tuning back in night after night after night. And also it wouldn't have to compete when it was time to compete with its rivals or contemporaries or whatever. It wouldn't have to compete with like all those A-list amazing HBO shows. It would just be competing with like the miniseries or the limited series, for awards, which would sort of like raise our chances. Which was an interesting strategy, looking back on it, on those decisions, or that decision from here and now. I don't know that it was, particularly brilliant or particularly significant. I don't know that it helped one way or the other, or hurt us in terms of gaining a wider audience. Probably it didn't help us too much with gaining a wider audience because, we did okay. We had a decent audience. We had a large enough audience to get a second season order, but it wasn't something that stuck in the premium cable world, the idea of releasing something that way. The only thing related to that I can think of now, looking back, would be like binge watching, streaming shows. Like when Netflix started releasing shows and every episode comes out at once, you can watch them all. That's sort of like the next level of what Showtime was trying to do when they released our show. But in our case, it didn't have the same kind of profound, positive.
But it's funny when Ethan says
audience.
that, I circle back around. You're right. They were running them all, because the big thing Netflix started doing is like, we're literally dropping all the episodes at once, so you can watch the whole season. That's sort of what Sleeper Cell did. And again, into this theme of being ahead of its time, that's another thing that Sleeper Cell did that was sort of ahead of its time. And I don't think the audience had caught on to that yet. It was sort of like, because again, it's an era where television shows, it took a while for shows to catch on. Even 24 wasn't a hit out of the gate, So it was an interesting strategy, but again, I think a strategy that the audience wasn't really there for yet.
And just as you're getting into it, we are going to take a break for one more week, with the finale of this interview coming next week, and you don't want to miss it, as well as the Nominate 5 from Cyrus Voris and Ethan Reiff. But in the meantime, we need a Nominate 5 for this week.
Now's the time to nominate 5.
Nominate 5?
Yes, nominate 5. Not 3 or 4 or 6 or 9. Now's the time to nominate 5.
Ah, yes. Nominate 5. that amazing part of the show, apparently, where we talk about either our 5 most favourite things. But we're going to do a bit of a twist this week because you got me last week.
Yes.
And you really got me unprepared as well. And I hate you for it. So this week I'm going to let you talk about something that's going to trigger you instead.
All right, then.
And because you are the gamer, I thought I would cater to your gaming knowledge and your love of games. And I'm going to ask you to nominate 5 of the worst movie to game transitions. So these are the games made of movies that are shockingly shit. Maybe they're just cash-ins because a movie is coming out. They're shoddy. They're terrible. They're the worst things on the market. What are they, Steve? We are going to count down from 5.
Oh, wow. Right. There are so many. And I mean so many.
Oh, yes, there are.
Jesus Christ, I don't even know where to start with this.
Well, we start at number 5, so we're going to go from there.
Okay. I think anyone that's listening to this who has any kind of inkling about video game conversions will probably know exactly what it is that's going to be at number 1. We'll get there. I do actually wish I had more time to prepare this.
Nah.
God, there's so many. I don't know where to begin. Okay. I'm going to play a little bit fast and loose with this. So you dropped it.
That's what she said.
Hey. During the 80s and 90s in particular, there was a company called Ocean. Based right here in Manchester, and their whole deal was to just go out and get hold of as many movie IPs as possible. And so that's why you have things like Hook and Lethal Weapon springs to mind.
Oh God, the scroll-along shooter.
Oh yeah,
I remember that game.
If it was made by Ocean, it was shat out to hit deadline. So you had things like The Addams Family as well. That was another one. That one seemed to do all right, but they were always usually very, very basic. They were more or less palette swap sprites. So at number 5, I'm going to go for anything that was made by Ocean during the 80s and 90s.
No. You can't bunch a load in. That is cheating.
Yeah, the reason that I'm doing that is because a number of them were just literal palette swaps. They would take a character and they'd just swap the backgrounds out with something else, but the actual platforming would be the same. The character movement would be the same. You might be like shooting a gun in one game, and then the next game it was like a wizard's wand or something like that. It was the same thing. So,
can you name just one?
What, palette swaps?
Well, just one from Ocean in particular.
Okay, if I have to nail anything down from Ocean, I probably am going to go with the Lethal Weapon game because that stank.
Okay, yeah, that's fair enough.
That was awful.
Agreed.
The movie tie-in has more or less gone the way of the dodo these days. So, number 4. Okay, let's go with the Japanese version of Star Wars on the NES.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which... Firstly, the game itself was pretty difficult. The Super Star Wars games, they were really monstrously difficult. But this thing was not only difficult, it was weird as well. Like for example, towards the end of the game, you end up fighting Darth Vader, and Darth Vader ends up turning into a giant scorpion. He somehow has the ability to shapeshift out of nowhere, which was insane. So, okay, I'm going to put that at number 4. Number 3, I'm probably going to go back in time a little bit further here. Probably just think of something like let's go for the old school versions of Raiders of the Lost Ark that came out on the Atari. Because, yeah, you can't really pin down gameplay that existed back then to gameplay that existed now, but you are looking at a game that was chunky and clunky with horrible graphics, where something that was apparently Indiana Jones, but you had to properly squint, was on screen, and it moved around and it responded. So in terms of actual gameplay wise, it wasn't as bad as some of the others. But just the fact that this thing is supposed to be Harrison Ford is just ridiculous. Looks nothing like him.
Right.
All right.
Where are we at now? Number 3?
No, that was number 3. So, number 2. Gonna go with one which I also love, but I also hate the fact that I love it.
Right.
It is a bad game. It is shockingly bad at a technical level, but I still actually quite like it, and that's going to be Enter the Matrix.
Oh, right, okay. No,
Yeah.
I have played this.
Yeah, it's not a good game. Just the fact that all the characters are basically walking around with their hands flat. You know, they're walking through a scene and the hands are there with the fingers and thumb kind of splayed out. There is a loading scene pretty much every 10 seconds as it moves on to the next area, which slows down the combat. It's really buggy. There's so much filler in there that it just feels like half of the game could easily be cut out and you'd end up with a much better finished article. It's worth it to see all those extra little cutscenes that were designed to tie in between Flight of the Osiris and The Matrix Reloaded. But realistically, you're best off just getting those separate. I think they're on one of the DVDs where you can just see them separate and just leaving the basic game alone. Saying that, though, wall running's fun, the actual gunplay's fun, if ultimately it gets quite repetitive. Path of Neo is a much, much better game, and you actually get to play as Neo, because that's the other thing with this one. You don't get to play as any of the main cast. It's just this ancillary kind of side characters, which didn't mean anything apart from Niobe when the movies came out. Absolutely none of it made any sense. So, okay, that's going to be number 2. Don't think that really deserves to be number 2, but like you say, I am properly on the spot this time. I'm having to pull these out my arse.
So can I take a guess what number 1 is?
Number 1 is not the worst video game of all time, regardless of what people say. There are far worse things out there. There are some shockingly abhorrent pieces of digital media out there. Games such as Ethnic Cleansing.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
Which is as bad as it sounds. Columbine RPG, which, is based on the Columbine shoot. Yeah. We're talking like the horrible of horrible here. So there's far worse actual video games out there. But if we're focusing specifically on movie tie-ins, it has to be E.T. It has to be the daddy. There is no way that it could not be, simply because it is such a shockingly bad piece of media. It's right. There is a documentary out there, if anyone's interested. I can't remember what it's on. I think it's on Netflix, called Atari Game Over.
Yes, Atari Game Over. Yeah, I have seen that. Well
worth watching, and it looks at the myth of the making of the E.T. video game, how it was created in about 6-7 weeks by one guy called Howard Scott Warshaw, which is an incredible turnaround. Steven Spielberg signed off on it, just as he did do with the Indiana Jones game. And it's a shocking game in its own right. It's astonishing it got made, considering the time crunch it was under, but it was a shocking game in its own right. But to actually be a tie-in, and to be one of the games that finally started to properly break the back of the industry back in the early 80s, it's a terrible piece of software. But like I say, there are far, far worse out there, both in terms of the technical aspects and of its actual content. But yeah, there we go. I probably could have done better if I had a little bit more time, but no, that just got launched on me. And now, as soon as I've finished this recording, I'm going to be thinking, damn, I should have said this one. I should have said that one. Damn.
Well, save it for the next time you get pulled up on games.
Mm.
But, I had to get some kind of revenge on you for making me revisit my feelings towards Rambo Last Blood last week.
I'm going to buy you that for Christmas.
And I will throw it at you.
Mm.
Okay, so, well,
yeah.
Now that that's over with, I guess, well, it's everyone's favourite part of the show, right?
Yes, the bit where we all nearly say goodbye.
Yes.
What's in the box? What's in the box? What's in the box? What's What's in the box?
No, it's not E.T., but Steve is going to tell us what is in the box.
Yes, what is in the box are actually lots and lots of bits of paper. And on those bits of paper is a movie that has been certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. And Andy's going to pull one out of a box. Now, if I have seen it, he's going to keep on pulling titles out of the box until we find one that I haven't seen. And then I'm going to go away and watch that the day before we record our next episode.
Will he like it? Will he hate it? We don't know until the beginning of the next show, but I have dug this out, and this is a bizarre coincidence.
Okay.
Yeah, it's more in relation to when we were talking about Once on the last episode. Was it the last episode? Yes.
Yeah, it
the
was
last
last
episode.
week.
I've pulled out the movie Before Sunrise.
Right, you did mention this. Was that what the director? I'm sorry, I can't remember what the name of the director was. You said that.
No. It wasn't John Carney.
No.
This was directed by Richard Linklater.
Okay.
This is a beautiful movie where Ethan Hawke meets a girl played by Julie Delpy on a train, and basically, they have a bit of a conversation. Now, we don't actually kind of really see that conversation. This happens towards the end, but as he's getting off the train, he comes back on and says, "I've got this crazy idea. I really like talking with you. She really likes talking with me. Get off this train with me now, and let's walk around Paris together and get to know each other until the last train." And
Okay.
the movie it's a beautiful movie, very much in the vein of Once, but without the music. And since you liked Once, I think you'll actually like this, and it's got some very lush Paris settings in it, so get a lot of culture there.
When did the film come out?
Oh, sorry. When did the film come out?
Yeah.
It was 2007. No, it wasn't. It was 1995.
Oh, okay. All right. So, one, it's something a bit different. Two, it's something which seems like it's got a little bit of heart to it. And three, it isn't from 2007. Okay.
Yes, it's got a lot of heart to it, and it's the first part of a trilogy. They've filmed every decade since. They've caught up with the same two characters and done another movie. So you're kind of tracing, their lives. But I'm not going to give away the story. You can actually just go and watch it and report on it next week.
Okay, then. Right. Before Sunrise, coming next week.
So, that's next week. Thank you very much to everyone who has tuned in. Thank you, Belgium. I'm going to get a T-shirt that just says "Thank you, Belgium."
Yep.
For being our biggest listening pool other than the US. And I'm going to bed now. I've got shitloads of work to do. So.
And I'm going to go to bed as well because, yeah, why not? So with that in mind, it is a goodbye from me.
And I'll see you next week also.
Bye.
Bye. That was the best timed meow I've ever heard in my life. Brilliant. That's staying in.
That's staying in.